September 22nd Board of Education regular meeting to order. Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Thanks, Ruth. Second. Thanks, Jen. All in favor? Any opposition? Okay. Comments from the public. If there are comments, please remember to keep remarks to 2 minutes and state your name and address clearly for the record, and know that the Board of Education does not respond directly, but we listen carefully and will follow up as necessary. Are there comments from the public? Lori, anybody with their hands raised? Okay.
Here, I'll go check. Sorry, should have warned you.
Okay, and we'll do it at the end of the meeting too, Lori, just to warn you.
Perfect. Thank you.
All right. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Second? All in favor? No opposition? Okay, reports. Mine is very brief. I want to just spend a brief minute thanking everyone again for presenting the coaching workshop last week, or last meeting. The staff was tremendous, and we can't imagine how many hours went into that presentation, but thank you. I think it presented a lot of valuable information, so I wanted the board to know that I'm trying to draft like a column or an informational sort of article to send out to the local papers. So as soon as that draft is approved by Kevin and Chuck in terms of its accuracy, I'll forward it to you, and just if you have any comments, okay? I just think it's real important, and the more people that either read about it or hopefully watch the video, the better. Okay, and also tonight we're going to have a workshop on assessment, which will not be as long. But I just wanted to take a moment to say that there are certain topics that the board has asked to highlight. And so I want to thank the staff, for doing the coaching one and the assessment one. So I think it's been a good format, although a little long, so we'll just have to worry about that.
Chuck tells me you can keep it to an hour.
Okay. So, okay, superintendent's report.
Great. I just have one item tonight. I want to congratulate Wilton High School. I received a notice in my inbox this morning that the high school has been recognized with a GreatSchools.org College Success Award, which recognizes and celebrates public high schools that excel at preparing students for post-secondary success. This is the 4th consecutive year the high school has been recognized, so congratulations on the job. The agenda, we're moving on.
Moving on. Committee reports. Teaching and Learning Committee did not meet the last couple of weeks, but policy did.
We did. Policy met last Tuesday, September 13th. Tonight, the board will do a first read of proposed changes to policy 6146, which is the performance graduation requirements. And then wanted to let the full board and everyone know that we are now actively reviewing policies that have not been reviewed since the years of 2002 through 2006. So we're working our way up. Those include the selection of school library materials, work experience, internship and community service programs, comprehensive planning, suicide prevention and intervention, staff development, student production of goods and services, placement of special education students, pilot programs and research projects, Sunday activities, and prohibition on recommendations for psychotropic drugs. Doesn't mean that any of these are going to come to the board, full board with recommended changes, but they will at least have had an active review, and any recommended changes will be forthcoming. In addition, we are planning an update regarding implementation of the bullying prevention and intervention policies, and also the gifted and talented education policies.
Okay. It's a lot.
That's a lot.
It is. Business operations meeting. Yes, we had one this morning.
We did.
It's only 12 hours ago. And highlight was the financial update, which is on our agenda tonight, so don't need to go through those details again. And within that, highlighted special ed, which we'll also talk about tonight. One thing that Kevin and Dawn brought forward was a new format for showing, or a more detailed format for highlighting transfers that are made in our budget, just as another source of information. So that will be helpful. Talked a little bit about where our enrollment was this year, and then starting the budget process. And Dr. Smith wants to write up a description of what the budget challenges and forecasts might be for certain areas that he'll show us and also take to the Board of Finance. So that's sort of an earlier kind of look at some of the challenges that we're going to be facing in the budget season. So whenever you're finished that, you'll just share it with us, and then we'll present it to the Board of Finance soon. October is the
Yeah, we're
goal.
looking at early October.
Okay, great. All right, so that leads us to the financial update.
Great. Dawn, welcome back, who's also with us at 7:30 this morning.
Great.
Yes. I apologize first, Dr. Smith and Chairman Lowe and all Board of Education members for not being there present in your meeting to talk about financials with you this evening. I wanted to start the financial conversation, first of all, with fiscal 22, where we kind of ended the year. If you may recall, we had a few challenges towards the end of the fiscal year. We had the power surge at Middlebrook and Cider Mill that caused us some unanticipated expenses that were not budgeted. We had some higher than anticipated utility costs, mainly in diesel and oil. We struggled some with the transportation for our sporting group, as we struggled, I believe it was, in drivers for transportation of some of the athletic participation, and we had to outsource that to a vendor on the outside versus our normal busing, which cost us additional expenditures. All in all, we were still able to cover all of our unanticipated expenses within our completed budget. We had an initial budget of $84,804,215. We did receive excess cost reimbursement of $1,277,637. And the Board of Finance offered up from their reserve charter $203,000 to help us repair the high school elevator. That totals to $86,284,852. And looking at the actual expenditure costs that came in, it was $86,281,868.23, which left us with an unspent appropriation of $2,983.77. Very lean budget, but we were able to make it.
Dawn, can I ask you a quick question? We had a certain amount of money allocated, and then we had extra expenses that we didn't anticipate, but we covered all of it. So where did all that money come from?
It came from a freeze that was going on. We cut back on a lot of expenditures, whether it was travel or conferences. We froze our spending, so there was not as much spending that was allowed. It was all just reviewed. Any expenditures that came through, they had to be approved for the necessity and need of it. We were looked at. So we were able to save some funds in a few different areas. We cut back on a couple of projects that were needed, that we anticipated doing in order to cover some of the expenditures or the power surge that had to get done. And then we were able to cover the costs with just moving funds around as best as possible. Mary Ann, I want to say, was instrumental in her ability to look at the budget and help us find some savings and move things around in order so that we can cover the costs.
Okay, thanks.
Sure.
Any other questions on that piece?
Is there anything that was cut from last year that needs to be added back in for this year's budget?
That could be covered with this year's budget. This year's budget's an extremely lean budget as well. As you know, when we went to the Board of Finance and to the referendum to have a budget passed, it was reduced a lot more than what we had anticipated. So we are already starting off slightly struggling with the budget that we have in order to cover all the expenses that we put forth, we needed. The only other thing that I can say that we have to cover still, which we are working with the First Selectwoman with, is we do have more expenses that we need to cover for both Middlebrook and Cider Mill from the power surge. We did delay some of the maintenance and repairs for those schools in order to wait for this budget to get here so that we had a little bit of funds that we could use. So I would say probably that.
Yeah, one of the costs of the, you probably recall some conversation, a bunch of the variable frequency drives, right? Say that 3 times fast in the HVAC units burned out primarily at Cider Mill. Those have been on back order for months. We're not expecting a shipment to arrive until early 2023. It won't be an issue for us because we're getting ready to transition to the heating season. But if you had been in Cider Mill a week or so ago, we had a couple of sweaty days in that building because these things are, set to on or to off, and we don't have the capacity to adjust. The insurance claim, didn't cover nearly. It covered a fraction of the expenses, and so that's a cost that we'll have to cover. As Dawn mentioned, we're hoping that we can work with the Selectman's office and that there's some funds that we can utilize there to cover that expense, so we don't have to pull it out of our existing budget.
Was that a flaw of the policy coverage that we had chosen and perhaps we need to reevaluate, or is that something
I think
that is
it's
across the board with policies?
I think, Dawn would be better positioned to answer that question. I think, my reaction to all this is we should definitely look at it if it's not meeting our needs, but,
Yeah.
Dawn, I don't know
Yeah.
if you want to weigh in on that question.
I totally agree. I think that I was actually very disappointed in the fact that they did not support us a little bit more with the expenses that we had with a situation that was out of our control. They didn't. It is something that has come up in a couple of other instances that we were slightly disappointed in the coverage that we had. So it is definitely an area that both the town and the Board of Education should take a look at, and possibly even look at changing carriers or changing the policy itself to be able to accommodate some of the losses that we have a little bit.
Is our disappointment appealable?
No.
I asked the same question. I got the same answer.
Sometimes when you ask twice, you get a better answer.
Right.
Yeah. No, we tried our best to.
No, I
get them.
appreciate
We
that.
had
Yes.
numerous meetings with them, and underwriters are very strong in their position, and we're not willing to be flexible at all.
So I'd like to turn your attention to the memo I sent to you titled Financial Update Special Education Expenditure. So what we want to do is part of the conversation around finances, start to zero in on some areas of our budget a little more granularly. And so for, I think, some reasons that are already apparent will become apparent, we chose to focus on special ed costs for this first month. And we, as you heard Dawn say, Andrea will probably repeat here in a second, we are very carefully watching our out-of-district tuition line. That line is already over. It generally runs over as we move through the course of the school year, as kids come into the system and then require some outplacement services. So I don't think we've ever been at this point where we are at this stage of the school year. So we will get an excess cost reimbursement, but part of our related concern to that is it'll likely be a smaller allocation because of the change in the law. So we wanted to just talk through why the cost is so high at this point of the year, and we tried to explain it in some detail in the memo. But fundamentally, you'll recall last year, Andrea, forecasting, a likely increase in the total number of outplacements. What we weren't forecasting was the type of outplacement. And so this year, we're starting the year, is the number 6, Andrea?
Yes.
So we have 6 students who are in therapeutic residential programs, and they're receiving, intensive care for very, very, very serious mental health needs. And so these are students who have suicide ideation, self-harm, and so the good news is they're receiving good treatment. The financial challenge is these programs are very, very costly, and they're 2 times or more the cost of a typical day placement. So that's a challenge for us. So in response to that, we have already frozen the budget for this year, and so what that means is we are taking steps financially to try to prepare ourselves to cover any additional expenses that may come as a result of these outplacements or other cost overruns. And so the process we go through, as you know, we have budget plans and expenditure plans, and so we typically start with our discretionary accounts, so things like professional learning, supplies, and we really go back and scrutinize all of those requests, and then we set up a process where we ask the folks that are making the request to reprioritize, and we'll hold as many as we can for as long as we can to try to reserve some funds in order to cover these costs. So we're doing that now. Dawn and Marianne began work this week going back into the budget and looking at various accounts. We've been through this before, and so the principals and other folks who manage different cost centers kind of know the routine. So I do want to let the board know it is a concern, and I think we have a plan in place, but we'll, as we work through it, we'll continue to just update you on where we are. Do you want to say anything more just about the dynamic we're facing here?
Well, I think first and foremost, Wilton isn't alone in facing this dynamic. This is happening across the country, Fairfield County. Over the past year, you've seen towns struggling with students who have died as a result of suicide, and so people are at a very heightened state. We also have students who are really struggling, and one of the things I think it's important to note from a fiscal perspective, many of these kids are kids who weren't even on the radar screen when we built the budget. They were functioning at a higher level, and then literally just fell apart and needed a very high level of care almost from the first setting. And so we've had to make some decisions in support of those kids and those families to get them the treatment they need. And the treatment for adolescents who are suffering at that level takes a long time. And it's very, very costly. Many of the students require significant supervision to prevent self-harm. So there's a lot of work being done. There aren't places in Connecticut, so often they're out of state. So there are all kinds of things that play into this. On the other side of the outplacement tuition, where you have day placements and other things, we've seen a spike, and I think we talked about this at budget time, with younger students. So we've had to make a couple of day placements for students at the elementary level, which has not been a part of the topography of Wilton for a long time. Our elementary schools have constellations of services that need a very high level of need, a wide array of student needs. This was different. These were different situations that we're still working through and dealing with at the elementary level, but those are day placements. Those are not residential placements. The residential placements are for adolescents. It is a struggle that we're all facing across the Fairfield County for sure, and across the state, because the resources are just not available to give the kids the level of treatment they need. And if you have a child who's at this level of risk, being at home is too scary. Kids you can't leave them alone at all, ever, when they're at this level of care. And a psychiatric hospital is not always the best place either. So it's a struggle. It's a challenge for sure. One I've never seen at this level before. So we're watching it carefully. We are, seeing students. Our staff here is working with outpatient care, trying to make sure students and families are receiving the care they need when things are at a lower level, and those resources are being highly tapped. So it's really a perfect storm that's happening right now for certain kids and certain families. So we're trying to intervene as early. What I will say, one of the things we're seeing, which is really working, is students are speaking to their trusted adults when they have a concern about a friend. Our gaggle alerts are picking up lots of things, so we're able to identify things that are happening that we wouldn't normally. So there are so many kind of stopgap measures in place that we're grateful for to try to prevent a tragedy. But it is taking its toll across the county, but we're working hard, and the staff is working very hard to prevent a tragedy.
How does the tuition work for a residential facility? Do you pay for an entire year? Like if a child
You
does
pay
well?
month to month.
Okay, so if they start doing well and they want to come home and can come home, we
Mhm.
are not committed then
Yeah.
for them?
You're not committed for the whole
Okay.
year. It's really, typically it's a month-to-month arrangement, but this kind of treatment and adolescence often takes a longer time. It's not something that can be triaged very quickly and returned home. Often when you start at that level of care, your step down is also residential, albeit much less costly, before you come home. It's a process, because you have to master a set of skills, then you have to practice a set of skills well supervised, and then you can come back to the place where you were at your weakest.
Right.
So, and there's a lot of family work that has to happen and training work that has to happen
Right.
within the family system itself.
Sure.
Because as you can imagine, a parent who's had that is also traumatized by it. And so you have to work, there's a whole system of work that needs to happen for a family to be reunified and come together safely.
And for ECS purposes, is there any differentiation between needing residential care versus a regular day type
No.
placement?
No, the
Sorry.
It's a
reimbursement
straight
rate is
calculation.
based on the total tuition
Just the total
regardless of the
tuition,
type of
just
tuition.
the type.
Yeah, we were speaking about that with our, the Business Operations Committee this morning. So the foundation for us this year is about $103,000.
Okay.
So, everything over that is.
You don't begin
You apply for
to get
reimbursement.
reimbursed until you're over that.
It's like
That's a great way
So
to
that's
describe
where
it.
it begins, and then
Okay.
you get about 70 cents on the dollar for every dollar
above that.
over that.
Above that.
Yeah.
And we talked a little bit today, and I thought it was interesting, and maybe something statewide to work on is, the educational costs and the medical costs.
Right.
And insurance companies aren't dealing with the medical costs, and education and medical are intertwined, so the school districts.
Yeah, that was gonna be
so-
my next question,
yeah,
if there's a
so-
medical insurance component or even a
Yeah.
legislative fix to kind of,
It might be something
yeah,
somebody else has to
Yes.
pursue, not at our level, but.
yeah.
The
You know, the
federal law, the IDEA itself, and there's legal precedent around issues of students
Okay.
with these kinds of needs. And the language of art, the term of art we spoke about this morning is if their educational needs and their mental health needs are inextricably linked,
Okay. Sounds like a
then
word.
it falls on the school district. And often when a student is at this level of care, education is really playing such a, their grades suffer. You can't successfully educate a child who's at that level of intractable depression, right? So
But some
it
logic would
becomes-
say, then that's the medical piece.
Yeah.
Some logic would say that.
some logic would say that to me too, except the legal
Yeah, of
precedents
course. No, I
don't
understand.
necessarily support
Okay.
that. So
Okay.
you and I think alike. I would think that too. This is a medical need. We're not medical practitioners. That would make sense. But that's not necessarily how it works in the realm of the IDEA.
Or even, is there an insurance product out there
That's a good question. I do not know.
that could perhaps, like if we're
There's-
seeing this?
I've never seen or heard
this
anything like
trend.
that.
Well,
I'm thinking.
the excess cost provision in many ways was the state's answer to kind of an insurance, a type of insurance to say local school districts will be protected from the catastrophic costs of a placement like this.
Right.
But about 15 years ago, I would say, there was a statutory cap put on excess cost. It used to be that once you were over 4.5 times the, in the good old days, once you were over 4.5 times the per pupil expenditure of the district, you received 100%
Okay.
reimbursement from the state for any catastrophic costs of a placement or a student's program. When they put the statutory cap in, now we report on December 1st, all the districts in Connecticut do, and depending on what's happening in the state, that's how the piece of the pie is determined for each district. Interestingly enough, now we have an ability to pay clause happening where wealthier districts are now there's kind of a sliding scale of reimbursement, and we are at the lower end of that sliding scale. So not only is the pie the same size, but we're entitled to less pie.
I know this is a financial thing, which is why we're asking so many financial questions. We want to get at the people and the needs
But
behind
I
it.
also want everyone to have the service. I don't
Yeah,
wanna take away
yeah.
from that.
So at some point, can we hear a mental health in Wilton kind of update? And why, I know that we're scheduled for some, but
Yep.
just to highlight, and then are there reasons why this is spiking everywhere? I don't need to know
Yeah.
tonight, but I'm
Yeah.
just saying if we can learn a little bit more about it
Yeah.
and just how we're doing. And
Great.
this is
And
one
perhaps
piece
if
of what we're
there's
seeing.
Other types of earlier intervention or detection tools that we haven't thought were necessary.
Well,
if
we
they're
have
not.
many. We have
Yes.
screeners, we have all kinds of things in
Yeah, 'cause
place.
we were doing
So I think we have built a
Yeah.
whole infrastructure to prevent a tragedy.
Yeah.
And I think it works well. We're identifying kids, there are lots of students and families who are being identified early. So it's not a failure of the system.
No, I wasn't saying
It
that,
is-
but if there's additional resources
Yeah.
that may be,
Yeah.
to talk about that at that later.
Sure. Yep. The other,
Oops, sorry.
go ahead.
Do you have 5 or 3 returning from outplacement?
Oh, we have lots who come and go. We have another student in the process of coming back now and in transition. So the out of district tuition line isn't always the same kids all the time. Kids are coming and going.
Okay.
So we have
I was
kids
reading and there's two numbers, that's
particularly in the
what
day
I'm trying to
placement realm,
Okay.
we have students who come back to us mid-year all the time. That's happening all the time, and then another student who might need to go. So that happens regularly within the day placement realm. The highest level of residential care is what I was talking about in terms of the more step-down approach, because they
It was
need.
something that was under Genesis. There was one paragraph that said 5 came back, and there's another paragraph that said 3 came back.
Yeah.
So I was just
We
trying to figure out what
currently
it was.
have 3 at Genesis who have come back.
Okay.
Since Genesis' inception,
Okay.
5 have returned. And if you recall, when we put Genesis in place, I made a promise to the parents who were outplaced that I would not drag them back kicking and screaming. They had to want to come back.
That's a choice.
And 5 came back from that initial cadre.
Okay.
So we think that's a very positive, and it's prevented many, many, many from needing a higher level of care.
And that's the good news.
Yeah, it's the great news.
Right. Yeah, so that's the kind of the remainder of the document we shared was really the purpose was to highlight the programs that have been developed here that we would consider programs that generate financial efficiency. So the preschool is an integrated peer preschool under IDEA. We're required to serve kids with IEPs beginning at age 3 in a least restrictive environment. So we achieve that by inviting typically developing peers to participate in the program. We charge them tuition. And so Bernadette here, who's in the room, has been the very skillful leader of that program, developing it and growing it. Right now, I think we have 66 kids in that program. 44 of those are peers. And so we're forecasting, and that's a revenue generator, which offsets, a fair number of those costs. So we're anticipating revenue around $325,000, $326,000 for that program. And so win-win-win all the way around. Kids are in our schools, they're with their peers, and we're providing them a high level of service. The next program we highlighted for you, we refer to as the Collaborative Center. And so Audrey will tell you it's a misnomer because it's not really a place. It's how do you describe it? A constellation of services. Right. But here too, the idea is, through an array of services, we are able to educate students with a lot of complex needs with their peers in our schools. And there is a cost avoidance differential because we're not paying the $120 to $150, including transportation cost, to provide a day school outplacement for those kids. And then, along the same lines, both Genesis and Community Steps, I think, would represent cost avoidance. So you've heard lots of talk about Genesis over the last year. That's, not only is it cost avoidance, we've actually saved with the kids we've been able to return from outplacement, and we've been able to generate a little bit of revenue because we have one student tuitioning in from a neighboring town. And then Community Steps, similarly, would be cost avoidance because it's less costly for us to provide a program to these students here in town than it is to outplace them. And so we're looking, somewhere in a range of maybe, 50 to 75,000 per child, depending on cost avoidance. So all of that is very good news on the financial front as we, continue to manage lean budgets.
Look at special ed saving you people money. Isn't that great?
So great.
I love to say that, I think.
I'm just curious if there's a need or a potential or a thought for a Genesis type program that serves the
Younger children?
The younger children.
We're in deep discussion about something just like that right now.
Okay.
So we will be.
I anticipate hearing more
be-
about your discussions as they're further along.
I think going into budget season, we all know what the budgets are, what it's like to do. But we will come to you with some ideas for additional strategies, given, we're watching carefully to see if the trend we were seeing continues and if it's something we need to think about. But it looks as if it's trending in that direction and that we'll need to add to our continuum of services at the elementary level to be able to keep kids here. And I think catching them earlier, when we opened Genesis, we opened it for 7th grade through 12th grade. And that's worked out so well to get the kids at the 7th and 8th grade level, because many of those the pioneers, I call them, many of the pioneers to Genesis are now fully integrated into the high school doing beautifully. They needed that time and that work, but they're there now doing beautifully. So, and if I really look into those kids' history, many of their difficulties began earlier. They were managed well in the schools. The elementary schools managed the kids very well in terms of their social and emotional needs. But if you really look at it, you could see the beginning. And if we had been able to do something a little different for them, they may have been, it may have prevented some things, so.
Yeah, we'll look forward to that. I think I told you this morning, we look at your requests for like a Genesis program and go, but then, as you talk us through the, not only the benefits to the students, which are primary, but also the reasonable approach to financing it, it's helpful. So-
Doing it at the elementary level would be a good idea. I think that would, because as you said, you could see the pattern. It might have been diffused a little bit, but you could see, some kids heading in a direction that could have been prevented or could have been realigned.
Those needs manifest differently in young children
Yes,
than
they
they
do.
do in adolescents, but you can see the beginning.
Yeah,
And,
definitely.
and addressing it, teaching some skills.
Yep.
It really is a skills teaching. Teaching the kids some skills for how to master themselves and how to self-regulate.
Yep. To control their bodies, to control their feelings, how to manage those things.
Yeah, can make a big difference in
Huge.
how they approach
Yeah.
and how they come into adolescence.
Yeah, huge.
Okay, we're good.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next on our agenda, SBA Fall Mac results, testing report.
Okay,
Dr. Smith.
so we're starting the clock now?
Should I?
Since you asked.
Don't set yourself up.
Yes, I'm going to have some of my colleagues join me, Matthew Pepper, our data and assessment person,
Great.
and Karen and Trudy. Excuse me. So I wanted to cover a couple of things tonight. First, I want to share with you the results of the standardized testing from last spring, and then I want to segue into a discussion about our comprehensive assessment system and how that supports our work around teaching and learning. Now, there are a lot of slides in this presentation with a lot of detailed information. I was not planning to go into detail on each slide. The information is there for your reference. What I'm going to do is I'm going to highlight the important information, but I will make sure to pause at the end in case you have any questions. And certainly, if you didn't have a chance to look at it prior to this meeting, afterwards, if you have questions, please feel free to contact me. I'll try to answer them. Okay? All right, so, Matthew, oh, there we go. Sorry, Matthew set this up, that's why I was blaming him. Sorry. All right, Matt. So this is what I'm going to go over tonight, the Smarter Balanced Assessment, the Next Generation Science Assessment, the Connecticut SAT School Day. We're going to talk a little bit about advanced placement, college acceptance, and I do have information on the most recent map that the kids took 2 weeks ago? Yeah, okay. Just in terms of a bit of a preview, overall, we're feeling really good about these results. Our students have made significant academic progress and in many cases are showing unprecedented growth year over year. In most cases, we met or came very close to meeting our academic goal of 80% of students at benchmark. That said, there is still some variability in growth and achievement across grade levels and subject areas, which I believe reflects some lingering effects of the pandemic. I want you to know that we are using this information in conjunction with what we know worked last year to accelerate academic growth, to put into place the supports our students and teachers need to continue to recover from unfinished learning. Now, just as a reminder, you're going to see a lot of percentages in the next slides, and what that refers to are students who achieve either a 3 or a 4 on the SBA, the NGSS, and the Connecticut SAT. In other words, those are the students who are meeting or exceeding grade level expectations. And we'll start with ELA. So the percent passing ELA in grades 3 through 8. What I'd like to do is to focus your attention on the 3 right-hand columns. You'll notice that 2020 is missing because we did not give the test in 2020, and that 2019 was a very good year for ELA. Most grade levels were in the 80% range. The 2021 column shows the extent of unfinished learning. Now, for the 2022 column, I'd like us to look at it in two ways. Both in a cross-cohort way and a within-cohort way. So just to remind you, a cohort is a particular group of students. So when we compare 2021 to 2022 for a particular grade level, looking straight across a row, we are looking at different cohorts of students. You'll notice that for every grade level other than third, the cohorts are starting off at a much better place in 2022. But I think the real story is the within cohort data. If you look diagonally, and I'm just going to get up and show you what I mean by that. I've done this before. So this is third grade in 21. It's the same group of kids now in fourth grade. And we can go this way. And you'll notice when you see that, there are significant increases in the number of students who are meeting benchmark. This data indicate that year over year we are getting many more students to meet benchmark. So when we see fewer students, fewer elementary students meeting benchmark, when we see fewer elementary students are meeting benchmark than our middle school students, we need to keep in mind that they were impacted more from the pandemic and we're starting from a lower percentage point, but are making comparable growth. We also need to keep in mind that some of these cohorts were significantly impacted during their very critical early elementary years, and it just may take them a bit longer to recover. But I'm confident that they will get there because we can see how much growth we are promoting across all of the grade levels. Now, I'm not going to go through these following slides in detail. They simply break out the numbers from the previous slide by grade level and SBA level. The information is there for you to look at if you are interested. I can tell you that the curriculum coordinators and building leaders have thoroughly analyzed this data and are using it to focus their improvement efforts. Other than third grade, the most salient pattern is a general increase in the numbers in levels 3 and 4, which makes sense given the increased number of students meeting benchmark. I will, though, point out, how do I go back? So in 6th grade, Wilton ranks 7th in the state and #1 in DERG A. And we'll see this in a minute when I show you the DERG comparisons. In 7th grade, Wilton ranked 2 in the state and 2 in DERG A. In grade 8, Wilton ranked 4th in the state and #2 in DERG A. And you can see that information here. So in terms of these comparisons, we certainly have a lot to celebrate at Middlebrook. We were first or second, exceeded only by New Canaan. And although the results for grades 3 through 5 may seem disappointing, keep in mind again that those students did make significant growth. And then in at least 2 out of the 3 grade levels, we came very close to meeting our goal of 80%. Now, just as a bit of an aside, what's interesting to me is that the spring map for these students in grades 3 to 5 predicted much better performance on the SBA than was actualized. And usually those predictions are within a few percentage points. But last year they were off by as much as 8 to 10 percentage points. And remember, I shared with you the predictions. We were expecting much better results. So our question is, of course, why? You know, my hunch, and it's shared by many of my colleagues, is that it might have something to do with how the testing windows were scheduled. And later on in the presentation, we'll talk about how we are making some adjustments to account for that. And just to drive home the point about growth, this is another way of gauging student growth. It's the way the Connecticut State Department of Education looks at growth. So the State Department of Education uses the SBA data to assign each student a growth target based upon their scaled score, which is kind of like a raw score. These growth targets are determined individually and are designed to accelerate achievement for students who are below benchmark in order to get them to benchmark within 3 years. At the same time, ensuring that students who are already at benchmark continue to grow by at least 1 academic year. So as you can see, most of our students are meeting their growth targets, which means we are closing achievement gaps and maintaining academic growth for a large majority of our students. Now, just to put that in context, this is how we compare to other DERG A districts in terms of growth. We ranked 1 or 2 in nearly every grade level. And if you aggregate that information across grade levels, our district growth was the best in the DERG and more than 4 points above the next closest district.
It's nice to have good numbers, right?
Yes, it is. And it's nice to put them in context, right?
Chuck,
Yeah.
not now, but at some point, just for historical context, I think it might be interesting for us to see what historically the growth has been across the DERG, maybe over the last like 3 or 4
Sure.
years.
Can you write that down?
Yeah. Thank you.
Sure. My recollection is it hasn't changed much, but.
Yeah, like are their numbers stable and ours are kind of, I'm just,
Certainly this past year.
yeah.
Absolutely. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this particular slide. It's a comparison of students with disabilities. We've given you both cross-cohort change and within-cohort change. I think the real story is that last column, the within-cohort change. So we have groups of students with disabilities who made, I think, absolutely amazing growth this past year. So year over year, significantly more students with disabilities are meeting grade level expectations. If you recall from prior years, that wasn't always so. The next 2 slides simply take the same data but put actual numbers of students to that. And then we compare students with and without disabilities.
Chuck, do they compare it anywhere, students with disabilities within the DERG?
It's difficult because what happens with a lot of this special ed data, it's gets protected at the state level, so on public facing, depending on the numbers, if they can reasonably identify those students, they won't display the data. So for many grade levels in the DERG, including for us some grade levels, it's not public. It's such a small number that don't meet that it would be difficult. I mean, we could ask them, but you get in a really squeamish area
Yeah.
by asking other.
I was only, if it was public, I'd love to see it, but it's not worth us calling districts and asking.
But I think when you look at the aggregate number of all students.
Yeah.
And you understand that our students with disabilities are included in that compared to the aggregate number of other districts with students with disabilities, I think you begin to see that the impact is across the board, in Wilton higher for all kids, each and every, not just separated out. So I think you can use that data in that way and give it context that way.
Okay.
And just looking at our own historical data this past year, kids with disabilities just made amazing growth. And I think Andrea's right, it's rising tide lifts all boats.
So yeah, if you recall in the spring when we were sharing the MAP data, we had noted how well the special ed students had improved, had made growth on the MAP data, and that showed out
Yes.
in the SBA data as well.
Okay.
And I would say that the reason behind that is not a solely special education reason.
Right.
The reason behind that is a collaborative effort between special education and the general ed colleagues and our curriculum leaders, all making sure that each and every student is viewed and seen in terms of their skill level, and individual plans are created for them, not just the IEP, but the IEP plus what's happening in general ed. So I think it's really important to note that I think we found
I think that's where I'm getting
spot
at. Like,
there.
right, you guys have done a lot of work recently across the board with gen ed and special ed and trying to marry them together. And so that's what, I guess that's my ultimate question. Are you guys happy with where we are, and have you found your sweet spot?
Well, I'm thrilled with this.
Yep.
And I think, watching what's happening this year and continuing this on, I'm a behaviorist by trade, right? So I don't ever say anything's a trend until I see 5 data points, right? So I'm gonna look for more data points before inside I'm cheering and wanna do a wave, and I'm wondering why everybody's not like standing and cheering. That's with me inside. But I'm gonna be cautiously optimistic in looking at, I think we found some really powerful pieces last year, and are gonna continue those and continue strengthening them and moving them forward. but I give 100% of the credit to the staff, boots on the ground, the leadership in the buildings, boots on the ground, the curriculum folks who are really just took charge of unfinished learning and all the drama around it, and created something quite special.
Okay. I think when we look and we talk about the DIRG and we talk about other districts, it's maybe naive on my part that we would all talk together and share like what worked and what didn't work, and we could all kind of grow together, but it doesn't
That'd be nice.
always work that way, which is super frustrating.
Well,
Yes.
you need the right
That
people
was-
on the ground.
Yeah.
It's not as easy as just giving someone a recipe. You need the right people to make that, to inspire and make people move. So, often you can tell someone what to do, but they can't quite do it in the same way. It's really an art,
Oh, yeah.
as well as a
We talk about
science.
that in our meetings. Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Sorry.
No,
Continue.
don't be sorry.
You're on the clock.
Yes, I am.
We just took 5 minutes from you.
Sorry, I'll
It was a good 5 minutes.
So I think the story is also very good in math, which I'm sure you're aware has been our focus for improvement for a number of years. So half of these grade levels are showing historically high achievement rates. All within cohorts made significant progress year to year, from 10 to nearly 20 percentage points. And we're looking at the diagonal here.
It's huge.
Yes, it is. Again, I'm not going to review these slides in depth. It's the breakout of the numbers from the previous slide. Again, the most salient pattern is a general increase in the numbers in levels 3 and 4. But I will bring you to 6th grade. Wilton ranked number 2 in the state and number 1 in the DIRG. In 7th grade, Wilton ranked number 2 in the state and number 2 in the DIRG. And in grade 8, Wilton ranked number 2 in the state and number 2 in the DIRG. You can see that here. And, frankly, my comments for this slide would be a repeat of what I said with ELA. The Middlebrook scores are absolutely exceptional. And although the results for grades 3 to 5 may seem disappointing, keep in mind that those students did make significant growth. I'll acknowledge that we still have a ways to go to meet our goals. And again, we're wondering why the spring map predicted much better performance on the SBA than was actualized, but we'll discuss that further later. And again, we see historic academic growth in each grade level. Those are very high percentages of students meeting their growth target. Very high. Okay, so,
If I could just step in for a second. The
Yeah.
kids who are at that level 1, their growth targets often accelerate beyond a year's growth.
yeah,
Because the goal is to achieve a closing of that achievement gap.
Right.
So understand that in order to earn those growth targets, those students had to make more than a year's growth, well more than a year's growth in a year. So again, that accelerated learning approach is not only impacting students for whom school is easy, it's really affecting the students for whom school is a challenge and academics are a challenge, and they're exceeding those growth targets. I think that's really a story
I think we know
for us
some of
to
those
watch.
students, and they are just thrilled.
Right.
I mean, I can't even express their excitement of looking at their scores and seeing all of their growth. It's been pretty exciting for them.
Yeah, it's good stuff.
so again, to just put growth in context, Wilton ranked number 1 in 4 out of the 5 grade levels and number 2 in the only other one in our DIRG. And I think that just says it all. Significantly more growth compared to the rest of the DIRG in math. Comparison of students with disabilities, again, I'm repeating myself, year over year, significantly more students with disabilities are meeting grade level expectations. And again, you can get a sense of the numbers and comparisons between students with and without disabilities. All right, so that's reading and math. Let's move on to science. Okay. The bright spot here is Middlebrook again. I'll admit we're particularly disappointed with the grade 11 results, but you may recall that this particular cohort has a large number of students who have struggled academically and from a social and emotional standpoint for quite some time. And I'm going to share with you in a minute, they did show unprecedented growth, but we were starting at a fairly low level with that group. This is how fifth graders have performed historically, both before and after the pandemic. Eighth grade, before and after the pandemic. And again, real bright spot. And here is the grade 11. Now, when you look at the DIRG comparison, Middlebrook again is a real bright spot. As far as the high school is concerned, one of the things that we're wondering about is how seriously the students take this particular assessment. I know the high school had to do a lot to get enough of our students to complete the test to meet our state-mandated participation rate. Greg Terrio was chasing kids down up to the last minute. So we're going to propose tonight to add performance on this assessment to the graduation requirements, because I think the kids will take it more seriously. And also the science curriculum is up for review this year, later this year. And so we'll be digging into this data more alongside other data to see what needs to be done to address students' performance overall in science. All right. Connecticut SAT. Frankly, these scores are not what we're used to seeing from the high school. But again, it has been very challenging to meet the needs of this particular cohort. I would also point out that although these scores are lower than we would like, the students did make significant progress last year. 79% of the students passed ELA in the fall on the PSAT. We got them to 87%. And 51% passed in math. We got them to 64%. Now, I have to say, that's the first time we have seen that level of growth from fall to spring at the high school. So although I understand that those results are disappointing, the teachers did a yeoman's job in growing those kids academically. Now, in terms of ranking, Wilton was number 7 in the state in percentage of students passing ELA and 5th in average SAT. We were number 14 in the state in percentage of students passing math and tied for 7th in average SAT score. These are historical trends in ELA and then in math as well. Oops, I went too fast. Okay, so these are DIRG comparisons. I think what you can see here is that the Connecticut SAT scores were generally suppressed across the DIRG in both ELA and math, and I think that's COVID impact. These are not the usual scores we see in any DIRG A. You know, that said, we did have a particularly challenged cohort here in Wilton. I'm going to move on to advanced placement. These are the number of subjects tested and the range of scores. The top 5 courses by participation were U.S. History, Spanish Language and Culture, Computer Science, English Language and Composition, and Environmental Science. I think, as you know, participation rates have been on a steady decline over the past 4 to 5 years, and I think that's for a number of reasons. I think students are not convinced that AP is going to be accepted at their schools of choice. So, I mean, Bob, would you add anything to that? We have seen a steady decline.
I've been tracking it for a while, and there's that, Dr. Smith, and then students register early now in the fall, and then some of them basically withdraw, and we need to address that, because we had a number of students last year who completed the course and then didn't take the exam. I started seeing this trend years ago when the parents of some of our highest achieving students came in and said, our students are admitted to the IBs, for example, and they stand nothing to gain by taking these exams. And of course, I tried to persuade them and say, you've completed the course, you've done so with pride, you will do very well. And there's just been a trend where they feel as if some of our best students will not get the credit. and consequently don't want the added and/or undue stress and don't take the test. And I hope we can find a way to reverse that somewhat, because they should be proud of their achievement and their performance ultimately.
Glad they're not required then. If you take it, you're not required to take the test. You can.
We have not required students to take it historically.
The cost is fairly high.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
right. I
To
forgot.
take the test.
Yes.
Yeah, so if a student takes 4 APs, they're looking at between $400 and $500 to take the exams for all of it.
You pay that, I guess also that in November, when you pay for an AP course, you're taking it nearer to the beginning of the year that you're paying for the test. And then, but by the end of the year, you're like, no, I'm not gonna sit it.
I had, the AP coordinators came to me last year and they said, you're going to be signing a number of checks. I said, what checks? They said, we had a spate of students who, you know, they're not going to take the test, and a very high number. So they registered in the fall, and again, if they're into school, the school of their choice perhaps, they stand nothing to gain, and so the money can be redeemed, and that happened a lot last year. So it's discouraging, because again, our teachers work very hard to prepare to complete the audit. They take great pride in their preparation. Our students historically have done well, but there is a trend where they are not taking the exam.
So who gets they get refunded?
Yes.
Back to the parent?
Yes.
Okay.
And they don't get their results anyway until well into the summer. I mean, so it's not like it could be their final exam, because it's not. There's
Yeah.
no way of recapturing that.
I mean, is there
So-
something to be said for, and you can all laugh at me if this is ridiculous, I have an A in the class. Can I take the AP exam instead of the final?
Well, part of that, Ruth, is we've essentially gone away from your traditional finals and midterms
Okay.
as we understand them or experience them. So there's that as well.
Okay.
That used to be very typical, actually.
Okay.
You know, the AP exam is the final, and you need to take it. Yeah.
And you almost can't require them to take it unless we're offering to pay the cost.
Right.
Right?
And there's also,
Because
to
you're kinda
me,
stuck.
there's a little bit of a philosophical element to it. Like, I would like kids to take classes that they find the most challenging for them, even if they feel like they can't handle the stress of taking an additional exam at the end of the school year, or if that's not the reason for them, the credit or those types of things are not the reason for why they would want to sit the course. Some kids might say, I really want to take AP Physics, and I'm really into physics, and I'm okay if I just get a B, or whatever the case may be, and I'm not looking for that, and I wouldn't want to, I don't know, personally, I wouldn't want to discourage a kid from sitting in that class and benefiting from that education
Fair point.
over the test.
Well, I don't know, I guess I would disagree a little bit in that if you're getting a B in AP course, you could certainly probably score a 3 on the test, at least. So, yeah, I don't know, I think just the grades in AP at all,
Yeah.
you know what I mean?
It
But,
used
so
to
can
be
you,
that the more AP courses you took, the college was more favorable in terms of your transfer. Is that still not true?
A rigorous course of study is still very helpful in college.
So
Yeah,
the kids
but
sign up for that.
But
right?
a number of them are completing the course and then not deciding not to take the test because they're already into college.
Some kind of admission to somewhere.
You will have found out before you take the test.
Right, where you're gonna go, or you've been admitted to a couple of colleges, so you don't feel like you have to sit for the test.
right.
And you can get your money back.
And it depends on how the schools handle it. Some schools you have to get 4 or 5, and some schools, some of the Ivy League schools just place you in a harder class. Well, some people don't want to start off in a
harder
rigorous college in a
Yeah.
harder class.
Okay?
Well, to me, the more important thing is how many kids take AP courses, and do they pass those courses? Exams are certainly great to know, but
Yes.
I'd really rather see how many kids are challenging
Right.
themselves.
So one of the things that policy didn't mention is that there is now a requirement that we look at access to higher level courses.
Right.
So that might be a fruitful thing for the policy committee to look at. I've only started looking at what the state's requiring, but that might be an avenue for incentivizing.
Yeah, we have actually a draft of a rigorous course access policy.
Great.
So didn't you have in here
Yeah,
the
47.
number
Keep flipping.
Of kids.
Next page.
of kids? Thank you.
Yes.
Yes. To me, this is the
Yeah.
more relevant, I mean, we can argue about the exam, and I get it, but I would like to see as high, percentage of kids taking AP courses without stressing themselves out.
Yes,
But
I would agree. And that's what the top box here is, the number of test takers, exams, and numbers and percent passing. The lower box does suggest a trend of not taking tests. We were approximately around 90%, and we're down to about 70%, so it is a trend.
So when you say 73% take AP in 4 years, that's one course, two courses, one or more?
One or more.
One or more, okay.
The unique
All right.
unique course choice.
Could we start keeping a history of that and maybe do 1 and 2 and 3?
You want to know how many students took one, how many students took? Yeah, we can do that.
So again, this is a trend of not taking AP
Well, I think it's
courses.
impressive for getting the test, that 73% of
Yeah,
our
it's
kids
three-quarters.
take 1 or more. That's
Yes.
3/4 of the senior class.
Yeah.
So that's great news. And my guess is some of them take more than one course.
Yes. So this is the percent of students passing the tests over time. We did see a bit of a dip in 2021, but we're back up to our usual historical levels, which is nice. We had more test takers in the past, so more scholars, but this still is a very impressive number, I think.
Has AP started complaining? I'm just saying the revenue is going down.
Right. That's funny.
Don't you think at some point they're going to say, wait?
Yeah, maybe we need to rethink this. This is the ACT data. We are seeing, you'll notice, significantly less participation, partly due to colleges going test optional. Otherwise, the tests are within normal limits for our students. And then finally, this just goes to the award that Kevin was mentioning before. We're always among the best in Connecticut, college persistence. We prepare our students very well to succeed in college. Okay, so now I just want to segue into the fall map data. So this was administered, the map, just a few weeks ago, and I've included data from last fall as a comparison. So in general, we are seeing students in a better place than last year, whether you look at it cross cohort or within cohort. Same is true at Cider Mill and at Middlebrook. I also wanted to let you know that I wasn't able to gather the data on summer intervention in time to include in this report, but we did see similar results to last year. So our investment in the summer program has paid off in terms of staving off some summer regression among our intervention students, and I can share that data with you at a later date. So just to conclude, our intention is to continue our work around accelerating learning this year because we see how effective it is in growing our students academically. And our expectation is that even greater numbers of students will meet benchmark by the end of the school year. In fact, our district goal this year is to get to 85% of our students at benchmark. We will be administering the map again in December to monitor how we are progressing toward that goal, and we can share that information with you probably in January.
So I always get confused about the map.
Sure.
The percentages, these are the students meeting the expected fall goal?
Yes.
The goals that gets higher in the spring, am I right?
Yes.
Okay, I just need to keep remembering that, thank you.
It grows with the kids.
Each
Yes.
score is associated with a percentile, and our benchmark is to hit the 60th percentile. That makes you 88 to 99% likely to pass the SBA at the end of the year. And because it gets harder and it expects that you grow during the year, that percentile travels up with you. So you'll see when we go through the assessment, a graph that shows how that changes over time.
Okay, appreciate that.
So I just wanted to pause before we get into the next part of the presentation to see if there are any other questions or comments.
No, I think the growth is outstanding and tremendous.
That's
and-
amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing.
And bravo Middlebrook.
Yes.
And, well, and bravo, everyone. I mean, the
Yes.
growth is great,
Yes.
and it's translated into, you know,
Achievement.
relatively good achievement scores as well, all around, but in particular, Middlebrook knocked
Yes.
it out of the park, so.
Yes.
And I think it's showing that our efforts around like IETs and coaching and accelerated learning and more data-centric and student-centric models, while not perfect yet, are aligning to
Absolutely.
make some real differences across the entire district.
Yes.
So, forward movement on those is great.
Does my heart good to hear you say that.
Well, and the fall data is showing that it was sticking, that
Yes.
we didn't
Right.
lose that over
We didn't
the
lose
summer.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And but your point about the younger the students, their earlier, you know, development in terms
Yes.
of literacy and math, you know, that took a hit.
It really
And
took
you
a
can
big
see it.
hit.
I mean, the growth is great,
Yes,
but, you
But we
know,
have
the
to
meeting the
get the
benchmark is different
Yes.
because those are the more vulnerable.
yes. I think it will just take longer for
Yeah,
them to recover.
exactly. I think that's good to
But
remember.
luckily, as I said, we are showing good growth
Yes.
across all grade
Oh,
levels. So
yeah.
I'm confident that
Yeah.
those kids, although they were impacted at a very vulnerable time, we will get them to where they need to be in time.
Are there any lessons learned, or should have done a little bit more of this or less of that, or need more of this, or, you know, whatever? Was there?
So, I just kind of reflect back what Ruth said. What I'm seeing is there was a layering of things that I think had an effect. First was setting a pretty clear target for the teachers. Although I think it created a little anxiety and worry at first. Once that passed, it was able to organize their efforts. They knew where they were because we give them that information, and they knew where they needed to get, right? And then they had the resources available to them to do that. Coaching was one of them. IET is another. And I also think that acceleration framework, although it really is just good teaching, conceptually the way we presented it and explained it and supported them in it seemed to have clicked with teachers. It kind of stuck. I don't think that we're perfect in all of those elements yet of accelerated learning. And I think we know where we need to work. I mean, the prioritized curriculum we got down pat. Responsive teaching, we did a really good job. Could we do better? We absolutely could. Self-efficacy is, I think, an area to grow in a little bit. And so I think when we talk at is it the next board meeting, we're going to talk
October
about our
6th, yeah.
action plans. I can talk a little bit more about
Sure.
how we're
Okay,
going
that makes
to
sense.
address that, if that makes any sense.
It does. Thank you.
I also focused in on that concept of each and every student.
Yes.
It was a very student-centric approach, you're not looking at the group and moving the group, you're looking at each student and moving each student. And that
Makes a big
that
difference.
changed a great deal.
But also, I feel like we finally are starting to have the tools that support the ease, the teacher ability to actionize that, realize that, I don't know if actionize is realize that in class.
That's a word.
Yeah.
I think too, I mean, at least I know at Middlebrook, our teachers went above and beyond outside of even their time that they had. They took a lot of their personal time to meet
Yes.
together and to work, and to your point, to look at each student and to really figure out how to get those scores up. I know that they've, not nice to say, but worked their tails off, basically,
Mhm.
and we should definitely
Yeah.
give them a lot of credit for
Absolutely.
taking
It is
on.
all theirs, they own it
It's-
all.
Yeah.
Okay.
So congratulations, and thanks for, showing us all the data.
Well, thanks for your support. All right, so I want to begin the part about assessment in the Wilton Public Schools. I'd like to just give a brief overview of our comprehensive assessment system and how it supports our work to improve teaching and learning. And what I want to start off just reminding you about is a comprehensive assessment system has several levels. And we kind of laid them out here by the level or type of assessment, the types of decisions that those tests help us to make, and who makes those particular decisions. The point I want to make here is that each level answers its own question, right? So, for instance, a periodic benchmark assessment isn't going to answer the question that district leaders need to answer, right? So you need all, in other words, you need all three of these for all of the important decisions to be made. So at the statewide accountability assessment, that includes the SBAC, the SAT, the NGSS, and some of the alternative assessments, the decision we need to make is, are enough of our students meeting standards? And that's a decision made by state and district leaders, boards of education, and building and curriculum leaders. The periodic benchmark assessment, which for us is NWA MAP and the PSAT, tells us which groups of students are meeting which standards. The SBAC doesn't give us that information. We can kind of analyze the targets a little bit, but it's not telling us which of our students are meeting which standards in real time. And that's for principals, curriculum leaders, IETs, SRBI teams, and teachers to make. The last level are classroom-based assessments, all of the things that teachers do to assess student learning in real time. That's designed to answer the question, what is next in the learning for this particular student right now? And that's primarily done by teachers. The periodic benchmark assessment, the MAP, does provide teachers with general areas that they need to work on, what standards they need to work on, but it's not going to tell the teacher what to teach the kid on Tuesday. They need their daily classroom assessments. So does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, this is kind of a graphic way of looking at our benchmark assessments as well as our summative state assessment. You'll notice that the map is given this year in September, December, and March. The SBAC will be in May. So I had alluded to before about we weren't sure if the testing windows explains why our students didn't meet the predictions from the map. It might be that they were back to back. So this year what we're going to do is we're putting almost 5 weeks between the last map and the SBAC. So students won't be fatigued, plus we have an opportunity to actually do something with the results, right? So if we see some weaknesses, we have 5 weeks in which we can address those weaknesses. I'm going to say also that I'm going to be a little bit more directive in terms of how those testing sessions are scheduled during the day. We did that with the map. It worked pretty well. We're going to do that with we're going to continue to do that with the map, and we'll also look at that for the SBAC.
Can you give me a sense of how many sessions or hours it takes to take one of these tests?
So, for instance, with the map, what we scheduled was well, it depends upon the level, several hours in the morning to do the ELA one day. The second day was for makeups, and although this first time maybe I wasn't clear, we are not making kids sit through a second testing session if they've already completed the test. Those kids that didn't complete will be polled and tested. And then math is the third day, and the fourth day again is makeups. So around 2 hours. Middlebrook takes a little longer. Middle Driscoll takes a little less. The SBAC, I don't know.
I think they typically take a week to do ELA and math, and then they have makeups the first half of the second week.
But it's not all day.
But it's not all day. And again, I think we're learning from the testing schedule that we implemented now. I think we might be modeling something similar to that. And the idea is get the kids when they're most fresh, don't test them to the point where they're tired, and don't make kids sit in a room where everybody else is testing. They need to be engaged in learning activities.
Thank you.
For your reference here, if you click on here, you can see the actual district assessment calendar with all of the assessments in it.
Ah.
Do I go to that here? Yeah.
So if we click.
Yeah, do you have
Okay.
you have the Google Slides?
I have it, yeah.
Yeah, good.
Okay.
So this is another way of looking at a year in the life of a student. Across the top are the MAP tests, and in between, as I mentioned, those curriculum-based assessments, and then we end with the SBAC. I did also include here this all grades. So you can look at kindergarten, first, second grade. I would point out that some of these, like for instance, the DESA, that's something that the teachers do that doesn't take time from the kids. Some of this is OLSAT. We do that in grades 2, 4, and 7. That's required as part of the gifted identification process. So you can go through and look at that.
Do you know how long that test takes?
Which one?
The OLSAT? It's, I believe it's an hour of testing. It takes a little bit longer to do that. And at Miller Driscoll, they do it in 2 pieces. It's a time test, though, which is a little difficult for the 4th graders because they're not used to the time test.
All right, now we wanted to talk a little bit about how we use our assessment information for intervention. I think you were going to do this.
Yes, so our SRBI teams are probably our first foray into really structured data process. We've been doing this since 2015-16. And this is a sample. The actual data sheets would fill up the whole page because we have, each year we add 3 data points to the list. But essentially, we're just putting the percentiles up and we flag anyone who's 60th percentile or lower. And then we make the teams at each school, which include the leadership team and the interventionists, make decisions. So a student who they're really worried about, they see a pattern of yellow all the way across the board, they might immediately invite to be part of the intervention, signed into an intervention class, or they might be invited to do more diagnostic testing. Sometimes they'll choose to monitor. A lot of times when students are right near the benchmark, but they kind of hover, we may not have the capacity or the scheduling to be able to meet all of those. That's why it's really critical that we test 3 times a year, because we can move students out once we see that they've met that benchmark 2 times in a row, or we have data from the intervention programs that showing that they've made significant progress. Sometimes they want to investigate further. What the teacher's telling us is not what the benchmark assessment is showing us, so we need to find out what's the gap, what are we missing from the data. And then the happy news is we exit students. They get to return to regular classroom. At Middlebrook, they can step them down in math, so they can go from intervention to the AIM program, which is a real benefit to those kids who maybe not ready or maybe a little bit nervous about going back to the regular classroom with no support. They can go to the AIM program and continue intervention. And again, we're looking for that trend. We don't want to just exit them with 1 data point, so we're looking for trends. And this is a fairly typical, like I said, once they get up to middle school, we have lots of data. We actually have to hide some of the data and really look at the most recent trends.
We also look at movement between tiers. So Tier 1 is the general ed program. Tier 2 is kind of basic remedial intervention. Tier 3 is a more intensive version. So for instance, if we see a student has been in intervention for a certain period of time and not making progress, we will intensify the level of intervention to a Tier 3, see how that goes. Hopefully we can move them back to Tier 2, then to Tier 1. Sometimes we do end up going to what I would call Tier 4, which is special education.
Do these typically happen, like these movements typically happen like 3 times a year around these
Yes.
testing cycles?
Yes. As soon as we complete the testing window, we schedule these data meetings.
Okay.
And all 3 tests are really important too, because the last test, we're seeing before the SBA how our intervention has helped our vulnerable learners. And we plan for the next year, so we recommend, especially if someone's been in intervention and successful at Cider Mill, we're gonna ask them to at least start the year at Middlebrook, so that we don't let them off in a new school, new curriculum, new situation without support.
And just out of curiosity, how long post-MAP to kind of making changes in a kid's learning situation?
How soon can they get intervention? Is that?
Yeah, how long is that? Is it like a week? Is it 2 weeks? Like how long post that do you start tinkering with
So-
different?
Oh, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, so Matthew has to pull the data,
Yeah.
create the spreadsheets, send them out to the teachers, then they need to find time to go through that data pretty much in detail in preparation for the meetings that we have, where we
Right.
come and the decisions are made.
Yeah.
Some of the work with parents occurs during that intervening time, but a lot of it occurs after this meeting.
Okay.
And that can be an involved process.
Yes.
We have streamlined it a little bit because we're now using Google Forms to get permission. We used to do it with paper, so you'd have to mail it home, track it down with the family, and get it back before you could actually start. But now parents can actually do it on their phone.
Okay, so in general, maybe like 2-3 weeks
Yeah.
from taking the map to kind of getting the help that the map reflects that you need.
After we close the window,
Yeah.
it is a very quick turnaround. I'm building the sheets.
Yeah.
And the schools typically have a week and a half to 2 weeks before we have a district meeting. And within those 2 weeks, we have sent the parent reports home, post them on the portal. Actually, we don't actually
Yeah.
send anything home. Parents get a notification, they can look
Yeah.
and view their own child's progress. So we've streamlined it, and the change in the assessment calendar has made that a better process. I think it's
We're
quicker.
getting a little bit early.
Parents are
Yeah.
less anxious about, because they know they're gonna get those results a lot quicker now.
So you think 3 weeks from taking the test to getting all your information to a child either receiving or exiting intervention?
I would say 3, at the outset 4.
Okay.
Because again, we have to get permission from the parents.
Right.
And sometimes that, because they have to give something up to get intervention, that can require some conversation.
Yeah.
So,
And then if the student is referred to special education, there's a whole timeline of process and evaluation that has to happen within that domain.
Yes.
So, and the parents are included in all of that.
And I guess it could possibly be faster for the kids that are already in interventions
Yes.
that just need a different type of intervention, because you
Yes.
already have,
exactly.
okay.
We see that a little bit more for literacy at Miller Driscoll, where they might need phonics, and then they switch to another element of the foundational part of reading. They will switch among those a little bit more than as they get a little bit older.
Okay. Okay, I'm going to turn this over to Karen.
This section and the following section that Trudy will speak to are going to do a little bit of a deeper dive into the levels of assessment that Chuck started us off talking about. So we're going to go a little more granular about how we use the data, both programmatically and at the classroom levels when Trudy speaks. So at the program level, data is examined to determine which groups of students are meeting which standards. Crosswalking this data with the curriculum that has been taught to date allows us to do 3 things. It lets us assess how well the curriculum is meeting our students' needs. It helps us to create plans for students who are not yet meeting, as Matthew just described, the standards that have been taught so far, or it allows us to create plans for students who are exceeding the standards that have been taught so far. Or third, it allows us to create building and classroom goals for achievement that are specific, measurable, attainable, and realistic. Every 5 years, each curricular area undergoes a review process in which this data is central. In phase 1, we do a data review and do a deep dive examining which standards are being met by which students. In phase 2, we do stakeholder surveys, and then all of the data, including the surveys, are considered as we identify issues and trends. And then as the data comes in, Trudy and I collate that data into tables for building leaders for math and ELA respectively. This gives buildings the most current information possible regarding the number of students who've been assessed so far, their overall performance, as well as their performance in the assessment domains. The data table includes previous year's performance, and for the last 2 years, we've maintained our pre-COVID level performance as a comparison point as well. This helps us answer how are our students doing compared to past years. Then we can think deeply about the current context and what practices are benefiting student learning, as well as which practices may be presenting barriers to student learning. From the overall performance level that I just described, we move into domain performance, and then we take a look at cohort performance. Once the data is all in, we ask how cohorts of students are growing across grade levels. This helps us to consider the efficacy of instructional decisions made over time. We also analyze classroom level data to identify our pockets of excellence so that we might study them in a cycle of improvement and possibly bring practices from those classrooms to IETs to scale. And finally, we work with teachers to identify groups of students with similar instructional needs and to create learning pathways for all of them. The ability to do this depth of analysis 3 times a year, from the top of the funnel to the bottom of the funnel, across the year, provides ample opportunity for us to adjust our response to better meet students' needs. Questions about that one? That's the deep dive of every level that we look at that data at. So there are questions off to the side that kind of guide that thinking as we look. It's a lot to look across. We try to keep it all in one document.
It's beginning to sound like rocket science, so it's over my head.
So I will stop talking and hand it over to Trudy.
So the NWA map provides a lot of tools that leaders can use with teachers for setting their performance goals. One of the things this is one that we were trained on this summer, and it's one we pay extra for. It's called a Similar Schools Report. And what it does is it takes every student in this is one teacher's math performance for their students. So each bar is a student, and they've matched each student with 50 other high-performing, suburban, wealthy schools, students from those schools who started at the same level. So they found another kid in a Wilton-type place, 50 of them, and they all started here. The dots represent the average growth. So the average of those 50 kids went to the dot. So what you see as a building leader is, how is this teacher doing? Are they growing kids better than similar students? Are they growing them worse? And how many are they getting over the finish line? The finish line is this green line. That is a proficiency score. So the idea is, any of these bars that ended below, you're trying to move those kids above the line. You're also trying to perform at least as well as other high-performing districts or exceed that performance level. And you see that by the color. Yellow means pretty typical, green means you've surpassed it, and red means you're not growing students at that level as well. So when you're looking down here, if you see red below the bar, it means you've taken some vulnerable learners and you have not accelerated their growth enough. So building leaders can look at a report like this compared to how they grew kids for reading. This particular teacher, the performance in reading was the opposite. Every bar was green, every bar ended above. So that leader can have a thoughtful discussion about maybe where the coaching cycles for that teacher in terms of student-centered coaching for the next year. It'll be a different group of kids, but that's an area of growth for that teacher.
So when did you guys start using this?
We've had this report, but because of COVID, we haven't had, you need to have the fall and spring data.
Okay.
So we took a pause because of COVID, so we're back to it. In fact, we did a cycle of professional learning for the admin teams who give the map, so they could do a deep dive into these extra reports.
So you're already identifying teachers, or it's too soon?
Well, so that's goal setting, so that's the principals are meeting with their teacher. So this is one tool they can use. There are other, we're gonna go through some of the other reports that they could also use for goal setting. This is just one of the ones. It's just a simple visual way of looking at it.
So do you guys have a ballpark idea of how many of our teachers place or fell where you would like them to have fallen regarding goal setting?
You have to ask the principals.
We could probably get that data.
Yeah, thank you.
One more, yeah. This is going to be quick. This is just an opportunity to have you take a look at a series of reports that are most often used by teachers, coaches, ourselves. The reports you're going to see include the class report, class breakdown report, achievement status and growth report, and student profile. The information contained in the reports inform classroom data analysis, classroom level improvement cycle work, and teachers and their IEPs and cross curriculum. This is the class report. It's kind of hard to see, but Matt's kind of highlighted some of the key information. The report provides an overall picture of class performance, including grade, weeks of instruction, the average RIT score, and the number and percentages of students in the 5 percentile groups. The report shows how students perform relative to standard domains. You can go to the next one. And this is the little bit different characterization of a class. This is the class breakdown report. It groups students by RIT bands within each standard domain. You can see we have a truncated list of standards, but you can see the standards on the left side. The report shows what students are ready to learn, what they need to practice, and what may need to be retaught. Teachers often use the breakdown report to create groups for whole group instruction, small groups, and individualized instruction. This is one of everybody's favorite, the Achievement Status and Growth Report. It's also known as the Quadrant Report. And it provides an image of student growth and achievement at the same time. For example, the top right green quadrant shows students whose MAP results are high achievement and high growth. We want kids to achieve, we also want to see them grow. Just immediately to the left, the yellow quadrant represents students whose achievement isn't quite there yet, but they're growing. So it's a good kind of picture. And when a teacher has this, or if we use this report, you can just sort of hover over each dot and the name of the student will appear.
That's so crazy.
I know, right?
Without question,
So
my favorite
fantastic.
report that we have access to.
This is one of our favorite reports. It's a student profile report. It's based on individual students. And it provides a snapshot over time of the student's performance in reading or math. And I don't really know which one that is right there.
That's reading.
That's reading. But you can see the bands, and you can see from year to year. You can see when a dip happens, and you can sort of ask, okay, what happened? Or if you see a student surges and moves up, that's also very easily reflected. Chuck has the
Well, I was just going to say, this is one of my favorite reports, and one that we pull up when we're doing those data reviews for intervention, because if we have a question about a student, you can just pull that up and visually see, what's the history of this kid? We can even see patterns, like the fall, for some kids, might always be bad.
I have one
I'm
of
not necessarily going to put them in intervention when I see that pattern, because we know that they usually recover.
So my question is, are these options for the teacher, or does she use all of them, or some of them, or?
I think people use different reports at different times. And we toggle through these reports at different times for different things. Often I'll get a question about, a teacher will call me and have questions about a student. I immediately go to this because I want to see what their pattern is, what their trend is there an issue? teachers probably more often use the breakdown report unit by unit. So if they're in their geometry unit, they want to see, I've got some kids who need some support early on, or I've got some kids who are doing really well, what kind of enrichment can I offer them? You know,
So it depends on the teacher.
it depends on the teacher. I think the teachers tend to really like the quadrant report. I would say
Yeah, I would
hands
think.
down, if you were to pick a report that's most used in the classroom by the teachers, it's probably the quadrant.
But in the fall, there is no quadrant report,
Right.
because we don't have any growth.
But I
So-
would say it depends on the purpose
Right.
more than the teacher.
Yeah.
So whatever purpose the teacher
I
is
see.
looking
So
to
then
use
you
the
go
data
to the
for,
report that's going to
you
give you
choose
the
the
best.
Yeah, my favorite one is the class breakdown, because as a teacher, you can see outlier kids who might need some individual attention, and you can have some groups. And sometimes that group just means, maybe I need to do some more formative assessment to see what's causing them not to meet those standards. But you get a really good idea of opportunities for grouping students.
We probably start, for us, when we do, okay, what's going on, I almost always start with the grade report, which is, looks just like the class report,
Yeah.
except that it's the whole grade, and then drill down.
It breaks it down into the color bands, the quintiles, so far below,
Yeah.
below, approaching, met, and exceeded. And it also gives the domain, and you've seen when we give some of those interim reports on our MAP progress, Trudy and Karen always focus on the subdomains of the progress in those.
Amazing.
It is. If you look at this quadrant report, I just have a question. That student who's high achievement, low growth, is that the student who's either not engaged or the kid who's most likely to say, I'm bored? I mean, just.
Possibly, yeah. I mean, if you look at that, most of those, the quadrant, if you go back, the quadrant, this quadrant report is set for the 50th percentile. We can, in our own reports, when I download a report, I can move the axes over to the 60th percentile and see who's there. Yeah, a lot of times that is, but
I
that
just wonder about that
student is
little kid
showing
there.
about 68, the 68th percentile.
Mhm.
So you could be bored, it could be a student who doesn't have room to grow, too, or there's not as much room to grow. Ideally, I'm gonna look at that
We
student
lost
and
them,
say,
Fran. I sent Kevin a text and said, we can't hear you or see you, but we're still recording.
okay.
I did too.
Thank you, we
So
can hear you
hopefully
now.
they can get it
We need
back
to
on.
turn the volume down on that immediately.
A teacher's gonna know that student and what's going on with them, and it's just a quick, like, oh, what's going on there?
Yeah.
Equally, loving the kids that are up in the left-hand top
Yeah,
quadrant,
yeah,
because
yeah.
those are the kids who aren't quite there yet, but they're really growing. And
Right.
the kids in the pink quadrant, okay, what else do we need to do for these kids?
Yeah, no, it's great that you can also.
That kid in the yellow
Another one.
who's the high achievement, low growth, the
Mhm.
teacher can see their class at a glance this
Exactly.
way, but then they
Yes.
may do that student profile to see, did they start
Yeah.
out higher and they're, they
It's
take
pretty,
down, or-
it's very
So
important.
the similar schools report that we pay for at the end of the year puts the whole school, and then you can filter it down by grade level and by reading or math in that quadrant. Do you know where we ended up at the end of the year? All three schools? In the green,
That's great.
Wow.
all three schools.
All right, can I ask my questions?
We're done.
Yes.
Same question I ask you all the time. I think we test our kids too much. I think there are, between all the testing that we're required to do and all of our MAP testing and all of our pre-tests and post-tests and everything, I think it takes up an enormous amount of time. I would love to find a way to streamline it at least a little bit. I appreciate some of the changes with the MAP testing, how it's being administered, and I appreciate the spreading out a little bit. I do think that last year especially, many of our kids were tapped out. And you got to the SOs and they were like, we just did this and I don't want to do it anymore. I think that also for me, you know, we keep talking about social emotional concerns of our kids and the anxiety that comes with taking all of these tests. I don't think we always take into consideration sometimes because we're looking at the academic aspect and we're trying to get these kids to grow. And I know that we as a board have asked a lot in terms of we want to see the growth and how are you getting the growth and how do we get there, and you guys are trying to kind of, I think, appease us as well, right? I'm not saying it's easy. I still think at the same time, though, it's too much. I know we've talked about MAP, and I know that you're sticking to your 3 times because of the pandemic and everything, and trying to gauge and see how much these kids grow and give them the support. But I'm listening to everybody talk tonight, and there is no plan in any future to decrease to twice a year.
So
based
I'll
on
tell
what
you
we're
what I've
seeing.
told the buildings. When we are consistently in the 80% range, I'm more than willing to have a discussion about going down to 2 times a year. But until we see that we are consistently getting at least 80% of our kids to benchmark, I would not be in favor of doing that. And just to be honest, I would feel like you're asking me to get kids to grade level and tying my hands behind my back by taking that away.
But don't you guys think with all the other testing you also do IABs, right? Like we do all of these other things that our teachers, I know, have a way of looking at these kids and seeing what kind of growth they're making or they're not making.
Okay, so IABs would be more that level 1. It does help the teachers make decisions about what's next in the learning. I wouldn't substitute that for the math. They are not interim benchmark assessments.
So what other options do we have?
I think the best option is to continue what we're doing and get most of our kids. So when you look at this RTI or SRBI thing, your general ed program is doing a good job when you're meeting the needs of at least 80% of your kids. And we're not there yet.
At Tier 1.
At Tier 1.
Right.
The goal is to have at least 80% meeting benchmark at Tier 1.
Correct.
Without intervention, without.
Right.
Right.
We're not there yet. I do think we can get there, and I would be more than open to having a discussion with the caveat that if we see some slippage, we need to go back to 3 times a year.
Okay.
Do we need to treat all the grades the same?
Next question.
That's a good question. Well, so maybe Middlebrook will get to that point sooner than our younger students. It's quite possible. But, I go back to what Andrea said. I'm not going to be convinced of a trend until I see multiple data points. It's great what we did this year. It really is.
Agreed.
My concern, and I said this to Kevin, is that there's this thing called regression to the mean, which is a fancy way of saying, oh, we did a great job. We can relax, right? We need to continue working. And our goal, as I said, this year, it's ambitious. It's 85%.
That's a lot, that's high.
In a community like this, there is no reason why we can't get 85% of our kids to benchmark, in my opinion.
I know that my kids definitely, and I can be a poll of one, appreciated and noticed the difference of just the more streamlined 4-day shorter cycle. I also would be curious to explore some of the anxiety around testing. As a parent, I like the 3 tests a year because it allows me to really see how my kid is doing and to be able to provide them, with additional support at home or to have a more frank and in-depth conversation with their teachers about what their goals are, how I can support those goals. I'll put it out there. I really like that the MAP is now going to be in December. And in my ideal world, as a parent, I would then have my teacher conference after that MAP and not in November before it. So I would be able to see what my kids started out with in this fall in terms of was there a summer slide or not, where they are, what are the expectations, then to be able to see after a couple of months into school whether we're getting them there, to be able to talk to their teacher, seeing those 2 sets of results, seeing what their class performance has been also, because testing doesn't always map how well a child is doing in the classroom, and then kind of really being like, so what are our goals? And what can we do together as a parent-teacher team to help get, our kids there, or my kid there, and then you have this spring test that says, did we do it? And then we still kind of have a couple of weeks to maybe do some more, do some less, or to then really think about what next year should be. Or personally, as a family, to make choices about what I might want to do with my child over the summer. So I would be hesitant to scale it back, especially without that consistent 85% performance.
Could we see some, going back to data, could we see some number of hours per grade level
Yes.
on these tests?
And can I add to that? I'd like to show you historically what we've done, because I have to tell you, before I came here, testing was probably twice as much as what it was. And that information
And
wasn't,
that's fine too, but just.
that
if you
wasn't always
could-
shared with parents.
Right.
There's an anecdote that I feel like I really want to share around all of this, and that is, the testing isn't necessarily anxiety provoking. I smiled from ear to ear because I got an email from one of the teachers I worked closely with last year, who was bursting at the seams because he received an email from a student from last year. It was a middle school student who thanked the teacher for the time that he spent in helping him understand his math scores, and he was beyond, the student was beyond happy at how much he'd grown and how much that growth had shown up in the fall math data. So for this kid, and I think this is what we strive for, it was a healthy experience. It was a way to see how they grow and what they needed to work on, and the student internalized it and felt very strongly that they needed to express their gratitude to their teacher. It was nice. It was really nice to see him here.
I will say also, one of our principals was really thrilled about not, because of the pandemic, we only tested twice that one year. And then called me up in December wanting to do a winter session because they needed the data to see if the kids were learning. And it's one of these things where you don't want to have this long gap and guess what's happening with the kids. Because, the beauty of the map is it's a short-term impact on instruction, and we've really minimized that. But that data is valuable. Those reports are valuable to us, valuable to our coaching cycles, valuable to our improvement.
I'm not disagreeing with any of you. I appreciate your story. There are plenty of our kids, though, unfortunately, do get really anxious when they take this. Not every student, but there are plenty of our kids that do. I appreciate your story. I, as a parent, it's just a different experience for us. Back to kind of what you were saying, is there a way that not every child would have to take the MAP test 3 times? I mean, I think our teachers are great. Our teachers really know our kids. And while this is a great example of like another number and another data point for us, it's just a lot of time committed to it
Right.
for our staff and for our kids all together.
Jen, I think just maybe philosophically, we approach this very differently. I do not see a difference between instruction and assessment, because they're intertwined. If we don't have the information we need, we can't plan instruction effectively. And I believe the math is a critical component of that. Again, I'm more than willing to go along with the consensus of the group in decreasing it, but my recommendation would be to wait until we consistently get 80% of our kids to benchmark. As far as picking kids, I've been reluctant to do that because it
I know, it's singles.
Yeah, you set up.
I get it.
kids and it's make them feel
And,
bad.
well, my question was more along grade levels.
Yeah.
Does every grade level in you need to be treated exactly the same?
Yeah.
Like, do second graders need it as much as fourth graders, as much as, I just wondered. It's just
I
a
know.
question. That's all. It's just.
If the state ever moved back to an old paradigm of not testing every grade level, I would more easily come around to that way of thinking.
Do parents have the option to opt out? And is that holding steady? Or more?
It varies from year to year, but it's not, I don't believe it's a significant number of kids opting out.
You mean at the state test?
Or math,
Or
yeah.
both
And
of
you
them?
can
Of
You
math
can opt
testing?
out.
Yeah, we would never
No,
force them.
Well, for a while, it was a state test thing, right?
Yeah, it was
So in terms of anxiety producing,
the messaging around the testing, is that a piece of it? Could that be improved?
Absolutely, and obviously, that particular math teacher is missing. There are a number of math teachers.
The whole IET approaches it in the same way,
Yeah.
and here, what are the grades?
And I often think if students are experiencing anxiety, that's a piece of information for us that we need to address for a student, because they're going to be facing a lot of high-stakes testing during their life, right? You know, we also see that the BAP happens to tell us how long each kid took with the test and how rapidly they guessed. So that is another piece of very valuable information in terms of teaching kids how to approach tests, right? You don't have to obsess over it. Staring at it for a longer period of time isn't going to get you the right answer, right? So I think there are ways of taking the information around anxiety and actual test-taking behaviors and setting goals for individual kids.
I also think the explanation to kids need to, we need to do what these teachers did and sit down with kids and help explain what growth is. That the purpose of the test isn't pass or fail, right? Culturally, we think of tests as you're either good or you're bad. It's binary, it's one or the other. And when we're doing these are assessments. I don't even like to call them tests. They're not tests, they're assessments. They're opportunities for us to take a deeper dive to understand you as a learner and to help you understand you as a learner so that you can participate in this process. So helping kids show growth, even though you might not be there yet, look at this growth. That tells me you're gonna get there. Is a totally different message than you passed or you failed, right? And I think culturally, we've got to shift this idea that testing is about pass or fail. Ultimately, the SBAC is kind of a report card for us. It's not a report card for the student. It's a report card for us. Are we driving the kind of improvement we need to drive from a curriculum instruction perspective? For the student, we can show them growth, we can show them achievement and growth, and help them learn how to look at this as an opportunity for participation in their own learning. And that's the difference. You know, when we were in school and we took all the Iowa Test of Basic Skills, we never even saw anything. You know, it just went. But there are opportunities for teachers to sit down with students and show them where they're doing well, where they're growing, where they could use a little more work. And that's good information for a student to have. And if it's approached well, then that overall anxiety of am I good enough or not good enough starts to go away. Right now that anxiety is stuck in, am I good? Do people think I'm good or not? Right?
And you know what, I'll be honest with you, some of our teachers are magnificent at doing that, others that's an area of growth.
Because I'm sure the teachers are anxious as well.
Yes.
And the kids feel that from the teacher, which is deliberate.
Well, I think it's the culture of
Yeah,
our school community.
Yes, of course.
Do you think most of your teachers, and I don't mean to put anybody on the spot, but in terms of, do they also, feel that this has been really helpful to have the 3 maps and the SBA, tweaking it in terms of much improved schedule this year? Do teachers find it helpful?
I think some do. I'm not sure everybody does.
Okay. No, I just wonder what the sense
I
of.
think when you see traction in your efforts, that
Yes.
feels good, just like it does to a learner. And a lot of teachers, particularly at Middlebrook, have been doing some work bringing the SEL into, okay, we're going to take the math test. So how are we going to monitor how we're feeling? What are we going to do to take a meta moment when we're feeling overwhelmed? I'll pause your test, you can go to take a drink of water, and really wedding those together. But I think teachers, when they feel traction in their efforts, that feels good, and they feel good about it.
And I think they're really starting to see a lot of traction this last year.
But I would be interested if there's a way to kind of look at overall, somehow figure out overall student anxiety or levels or, feelings towards the assessments and whether they look at them as an assessment or a test, and perhaps look at ways to help turn turn that approach a little bit.
Can we stop calling it a map test? Because just calling it a map assessment, that seems like
It's the word
an
test,
easy thing to
mostly.
do. But we're still, and all I've ever known it as a map test, which is anxiety inducing. And
So,
I also think the anxiety kids feel, and this is not, it's not pejorative, it's just cultural. How parents react when they see the test and
Right.
the tension around it. How, all of those things play into a child's perception of am I good enough or not good enough, right? The stress, the tension, all of those things around this stuff, we have to get better as a community in understanding that taking a look at how kids are learning in a more objective way, like a map, versus the teacher. I thought the chart that looked at what teachers do day to day and what questions they're answering versus what the map does and what questions it answers, I think it's important for us as a community to understand that all of that information plays different roles in allowing us to do the work we do that allows us to get the overall outcome, which is that chart that says our kids are well prepared for college. Because well prepared for college doesn't start in 9th grade.
No.
Well prepared for college starts in kindergarten,
Yep.
right? And so you have to, it takes 12 years for a reason, right? So teachers knowing this information and being able to sit with their teams and say, what are we knowing about, is our curriculum delivering, right? And then if the curriculum is delivering, then it's about teachers and administrators working together to decide if I'm, maybe I'm a first-year teacher and I have some skills to learn in particular areas. This data gives you that information so much faster than waiting year after year for that teacher to be flailing a bit in a particular curriculum area. So this allows for that to happen in real time. So we don't have a student get to 8th grade who's missed out on a huge domain of mathematics and then gets algebra and doesn't know what to do,
Yeah.
right?
Right, it's just the frequency of it, that's all.
Absolutely.
But you had
It's
mentioned-
finding the sweet spot,
Right.
right?
And that's what I'm constantly
How much
trying
time
to
in
find.
between,
Yes. Right.
is it okay to let 6 months go by if a child's not learning?
Right, no.
No.
Probably not.
Right.
And the teacher assessments are great at finding out what to teach on Tuesday. They're not great at determining whether or not the child is going to reach a benchmark in a particular time. You need an assessment that looks at that. And you need it, at that mid-year point. Because if you go beginning and end, a whole year's gone by and you've missed an opportunity to change what you're doing, right?
I'd also point out that 3 times a year is recommended best practices for benchmark assessments. And even if we were to decide that we want to go down, legally we can't do that for grades kindergarten through 3rd grade reading. It's required.
I think
And it's
part of it
required
too-
for a reason.
Right.
It's good practice.
You guys always tell us, right, the map predicts the SFA.
Yeah.
So in part, I'm like, it's like a gear up or whatever, getting them ready. But if you already can predict what they're gonna do in SFA based on what they did in math, you know what I mean? Like, so why are we making them do both of them?
Yeah, I don't do the map the 3rd time primarily to get a prediction. We
Okay.
do it for this, so that we can measure growth.
Okay. I want to go back to one more thing that you said, and then I'll stop. The question that you had talked about, or the comment about teachers explaining to kids their growth and then seeing the numbers. Part of the issue with that is it gets a little tricky because now kids are running around talking about,
Absolutely.
I got this number, oh, you got this one. They really have no idea what they're talking about, except
right.
that they have a number, right? So it's just trying to manage, right? And I guess everybody's in this learning process and everybody's trying to figure it out together.
Yeah.
And I
And
just
some
want
of our-
everybody to be mindful of the
Right.
bigger like
I
all the
agree.
little things. I get the bigger
I
picture,
agree.
but there's
And
all
I
these
will
little things
admit
that
that
go
that
into
is an
it.
area of growth for us. We have some bright spots. Some teachers know how to goal set with a kid and make them feel good about it.
Right.
Some of our teachers are struggling to do that in a meaningful way. And I think that's the area of growth for us.
And
Also, I
also
think
culturally understanding that competition, what I do day to day, I'm trying to be my best self every day, right? My worth is not judged against you. My worth is my worth. right?
Right.
So, and that's something we all, as a community, in this world of competition, right? I can compete with me and get better every single day, right? And sit next to you, and you're getting better every single day too, and I can be happy for you and not have to worry if I'm still not good enough, if I'm not measuring up. Right,
That's
there's
the
a place for
cultural
us all. So we have some cultural work to do in how adults talk about this stuff, how we talk to kids about this stuff, how we measure,
How the kids talk to each other.
how the
because
kids talk
that's a
to each
massive
other
source
about
of
it.
anxiety.
We have, but that's all gonna start with us. It's all gonna start with how we work.
Is
Right.
there?
So with that, I'm sorry to interject here, but I'm also looking at the real time. We're raising wonderful points and having a rich discussion and asking sort of existential questions. So if there's some way of following up where you can provide us a little bit more data.
Sure.
And then because you heard the concerns of, yes, we want to do well, and yes, we want to measure, and we have to be precise and individual, and all the wonderful, rich things that testing can show us, assessments, sorry. In the principal's action plans, it might be nice to take on that other element of, how can you better put assessment, in context for kids? If that could be a little piece of work that everybody can do.
Sure.
And whether the schedule's improved, great. So we all have this common language by which we introduce it, great. Here's a letter to parents about how to talk to your kid about it, check. So, just if there's a little bit of action planning that can go around about contextualizing the test, let's try that.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Okay, I'm sorry to have interjected that, but I am looking at the time too. It is 9:06.
I tried.
Oh, no. This is the discussion, and this is what happens in workshops. And I left last time saying,
Should we do this at
the idea of blending a workshop and a meeting, well, I'm not sure, it worked the first time. And Kevin said, oh, yeah, we'll keep doing it, it'll be shorter. I'm not sure we passed
Well,
the second
we get a
time
couple
either.
more bites at the apple.
So anyway, but we appreciate your time tonight, and I see people's eyes glazing over, and I sympathize with the principals and the staff who are here tonight. So I'm going to kind of ask everybody what you want to quickly do with the rest of the agenda. Again, there's no deadlines on this, but I'm happy to push it forward too.
They've been on here twice. So does anybody have any comments on it? Do you want to do it that way and we can just get rid of them?
Are we talking about the policy or the superintendent board goals?
All.
Yeah, I took the feedback, you sent me some questions and comments about the PBGRs. I also appreciated the corrections.
Okay.
Made some changes, so.
I don't have anything to discuss about any of them.
I think there was only one thing that I had on,
Wait, where are we? Are we on the review? Let's do the
Let's
policy.
stick with the
Oh,
PBGR,
okay.
yeah.
That, I did see a lot of questions and comments. This is a first read anyway. So is there anything new to add to tonight before we come to the second reading? No, great. Superintendent goals, is there a motion to approve them with the edits that were recommended? You guys
just
think?
around the focus group, that one, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
the-
Mhm.
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah, with those edits, so.
So moved. Is there a
Second.
second? All in favor? Okay. Board of Education goals.
I would like to just add one word and then move to approve them with the addition of that one word.
Okay. And the word is?
Well, it's two words, and achievement. In number 4, A, at the end, it says regular review student achievement measures, utilizing comprehensive data, et cetera. The last sentence, it says, to ensure growth, I would like to add, and achievement at all levels.
Okay.
And my changes are on here, so I'll just give them to you.
Okay. Have the rest of us seen them
Okay, I will send it to everybody.
though? Okay. How about, do you want to wait then 1 week on
Nope.
those? No?
It's adding a word that was left out.
Oh,
and
these are
taking out
edits?
another word, and yeah.
Okay, edits fine. Anything
Edits, we can
substantive?
approve with those types of edits, yes.
Yeah, okay, so with edits, with Ruth's 2 words, Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Whoa, moving along. All right, you see all our meetings coming up. Comments from the public?
Don't see any raised
Okay.
hands.
All right, I have one thing to add to my Board of Ed report, and I needed to add it at the end, because this is with mixed feelings, mostly regret, that I announced this tonight, that my family, my husband and I are making plans to move. And after a long hunt for our next house, hoping it would be in Wilton, but with low inventory all around, that was not to be the case. So our next house will be in Weston. So our house is currently, literally, as we speak, going on the market. And as that timeline progresses, I will let you know. But it will require, again, with deep regret, that I resign from our Board of Education. It's been an honor to serve with everyone. It's not over yet, because I have no idea quite yet what the timeline will be, but I wanted to give everybody a heads up. And there will be no comment about that, because I'm going to stop talking. So, I'm adjourning the meeting. Thank you, everybody. Good night. That's pretty good.
Maybe we should have workshops more often.
To move.
9:10.